massive problem is over a bunch of uninhabited islands known in Chinese as the Diaoyudao, or the Diaoyu Islands, or in Japanese as the Senkaku Islands. And it's a territorial dispute that has been going on basically since the Sino-Japanese War in the beginning of the 19th century. What's really going on, though, it's about oil and national pride. There's a lot of natural resources there near those islands, and the Chinese claim them, the Japanese claim them, and as China has been growing economically, its military ambitions and territorial ambitions have mirrored its economic rise, and so they're trying to press the button and push Japan out a bit out of its comfort zone and make claims to the oil and fishing rights around that part of the South China Sea. Well, this cat and mouse game between the Japanese self-defense forces and the Chinese fishing trawlers have been going on for the last couple of years. And usually the Japanese just kind of shoo the Chinese away, and the Chinese aren't looking for a confrontation, and so they usually just go away to another part for the fishing area. This time, we don't know why the Chinese, if the Chinese trawler deliberately ran the Japanese self-defense force boat, or if the Japanese self-defense force made an aggressive move. But the Chinese feel that there is no territorial dispute with Japan. They claim that this has been China's land since ancient times. What the interesting thing here is in 2008, the Chinese and Japanese signed an accord on how to go about jointly exploring the oil and gas area around these Diaoyu Islands. And that was the modus operandi for the last couple of years. But now as China has been growing a bit stronger, and also with the U.S. having done military exercises with Korea this year in the South China Sea, right off of China's coast, and with the U.S. selling weapons to Taiwan 6 months ago, the Chinese want to more assert their position in the South China Sea, in the Sea of and the surrounding areas. So maybe they're kind of probing where Japan, or even potentially where the U.S. would make a stand. So these type of probes, I would say, and we can say that Japan stood down on this, but I think these type of probes will continue, and the Chinese, they view any U.S. presence in these waters as intrusive. Recently, in last July at the ASEAN summit in Hanoi, Hillary Clinton said that the U.S. wanted to make sure that all disputes in this area were resolved peacefully. China basically said, if you do not have a direct interest here, please butt out. Of course, for the U.S., it is in the U.S.'s interest to keep the free sea lanes where much of the world's oil passes through open, but China has their own views of how the U.S. 7th Fleet should operate, and their maritime ambitions mirror their economic and military strength. And so they're putting out, people say by 2015 the Chinese will have their first aircraft carrier, and they're building more submarine capability. So we'll see over the next couple of years the Chinese making more assertive and aggressive. The Chinese desire to expand their maritime and naval power in the South China Sea will affect business in potentially several ways. If the U.S. continues to sell Taiwan weapons, China will hurt the U.S. businesses where it hurts most, in the pocketbook. We saw after selling weapons to the Taiwanese about 6 months ago, the Chinese stopping some contracts, or at least threatening to stop contracts with Boeing and Grumman and other companies which were selling hardware to Taiwan. For Japanese companies, of course, the fallout from this conflict is already apparent in that the Japanese have stopped ministerial and provincial trade exchanges. They have effectively stopped the export of rare earth metals, which China has about 99% of the world's rare earth metals, and these things are used in high-tech LED technology. And so while China hasn't said they have explicitly stopped, reports are that they have stopped shipping. So China can very easily either stop buying from companies and U.S. companies, and also stop exporting these rare earth metals have become quite an issue because China does not want to export them very much. So it could hurt in some. One very interesting thing about China and this Japanese conflict is that I think while China both wants to assert itself in the world and wants also to, of course, claim the natural resources in the South China Sea, when it comes to Japan, the Chinese have a very deep psychological block in the sense, and this may seem unfair to say, but if China can reconcile being invaded or imperialized by Britain, let's say, during the Opium Wars, because Britain was the power at that time. But for the Chinese to have been colonized by Japan, a country with 1/10 of the population and 1/10 of the landmass, it's very hard for the Chinese to accept that they were colonized by Japan, because it makes them realize how corrupt and how feeble and how much infighting there was. So Japan holds a very special psychological place in the Chinese psyche. In this current conflict, there were articles in the Chinese press about how we have to find the weak points of Japan, how we haven't done enough studying of Japan, and how we have to find their Achilles heel so that if they get uppity again and don't listen to us, we know how to press them so that they really hurt. So this is just very interesting, the way the Chinese get very hyper-reactive when it comes to Japan, and this trend will continue. Qingdao is a beautiful place on the east coast of China. It became present on the international map in the late 19th century when the Germans came here and established it as their Far East naval base. It was a pretty placid place until the early 20th century when the Japanese invoked their alliance with the British during World War I and tried to take all of the German colonies in Asia, including Qingdao. That's when the Japanese came and issued their 21 demands and were very strong in China, and that's where a lot of the Chinese anti-Japanese sentiment started from. Qingdao, on the other hand, has always been more of just a peaceful, nice place to come. Beautiful blue skies, pleasant weather, lovely seafood. You have the sea and the sun and the mountains, and it's just and of course the Qingdao beer factory, which the Germans brought in the early 1900s. Where we're sitting here is part of the German governor's mansion complex, which was built in 1904 for the German Governor General. I think he was actually punished by the Germans for spending way too much money and going over budget on this project, which probably anyone doing business in China can understand when you're dealing with their head office, because almost every project in China costs more than you think it's going to be. So Qingdao is just a lovely place to relax, enjoy some fresh air, eat some seafood, throw down a Qingdao pijiu or two, and really recover and gain some juices for when you got to go back to the wild woods of Shanghai or Beijing.